Hello everyone, this is part 9 of What If Naruto Travels Back in Time, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
9 days later, Naruto sighed as he put away the last folder of paperwork for the day. After closing the door, he stood up and stretched, trying to get the kinks out of his muscles. Today had been unusually long. There were quite a few visits from construction contractors, clan heads or representatives, as well as Konoha shinobi stopping by. He felt that it was understandable, however, since he hadn't been available for the last week. Mikoto's father, Kagami, had passed away. It was rather sudden. Before he had left on the mission to destroy the Canopy Bridge, the man appeared perfectly healthy, other than his usual limp. Oraheim had claimed that he exhibited no unusual behavior. She was just arriving to work one day as usual and noticed that he wasn't awake like he normally was. When she went to check on him and he didn't respond, she immediately contacted Mikoto and a medic at the hospital. Soon had performed an autopsy and said that it appeared to be heart failure. He had some lingering issues back from when his leg was ruined, and now it just seemed that his age caught up with him. Sadly, the man was only in his early 50s, even if that was considered old for a shinobi, not to mention a retired one. They held the funeral 2 days ago, only inviting his closest friends and clan members. Kagami had been removing himself from the public eye ever since his daughter took over as clan head, so it seemed as though he had been preparing everyone for something like this. Mikoto had been in emotional turmoil the day she found out about her father's death, as Naruto had still been out on his mission and she had no idea when he would get back. According to Oraheim, Mikoto had clung to Itachi like a lifeline until Naruto had entered the door. As his wife had pretty much sobbed herself to sleep in his arms, he had to carry her to bed. She had slowly been recovering over the course of the week, only with a bit of a setback during the funeral. By yesterday she had mostly returned to her usual self, if a little more subdued. Cleaning up his desk, Naruto made sure the windows were closed and left his office, closing the door behind him. Walking downstairs, he entered the foyer of the building, and spotted the middle-aged secretary at the desk. "Have a good evening, Kimidori-san." She looked up from whatever she was doing at her desk and offered her boss a small smile. "Try to have a good night, Naruto-sama. Please extend my sympathies to Mikoto-sama." "I will. Thank you." Naruto exited the building and headed for home, examining some of the bustle around him. He had purchased a small, newly constructed office-style building out in Konoha's latest edition. The first ring. The suggestion actually came from Hiruzen, asking if Naruto had wanted a new office closer to work since there was a lot more that he had to do, not to mention the one he was using was filling up rather quickly. The first ring was the latest and likely last expansion for Konoha, simply because if it grew any larger the Fire Lord would be required to appoint a governor to supervise the burgeoning population. That would add a whole extra level of political issues, especially where the other shinobi villages were concerned. Besides that, even now people were starting to forget that Konoha was supposed to be merely a hidden village. It was quickly turning into a not quite hidden city. A little over a year ago Naruto had suggested that he would just purchase an entire building, under ownership of the Uchiha clan, that he could move all things relating to the construction and maintenance of Konoha to. Hiruzen agreed with the idea, and began funneling most of the D-rank maintenance-style missions through Naruto's office as well. Being closer to the construction helped the people that Naruto had to deal with on a regular basis too. They no longer had to travel all the way to the center of Konoha just to speak with him. Since the building was owned by the Uchiha, part of it also doubled as an extended military police building. It gave the patrols out here a home base of sorts, so that they didn't have to travel all the way back to the Uchiha grounds in the village proper. For a while Naruto was concerned that Fugaku would come out there to examine the place, but he had sent Uchiha Suma instead. Apparently she didn't much care for Fugaku either, and was glad to be out from under his thumb. Naruto knew they'd get along just fine, in that case. Naruto took to the rooftops the moment he passed through the main gate, trying to get home quickly. He had hired on Oraheim to give Mikoto help when she needed it, and he figured having a nanny around for Itachi and any other children they may have someday would be a good idea. The 17-year-old girl was all smiles when he asked, she confirmed that she was expecting to have to look for another job. However, she was more than happy to look after Itachi and assist in whatever capacity he or Mikoto needed. Arriving at home, Naruto entered and called out to Mikoto, who responded that she was in the living room. Moving through the house, he stopped when he looked in the room, only to see his wife staring at what looked like a wrapped-up jar on the table in front of the couch. Mikoto. She looked up briefly and gave him a tight smile, then beckoned him over and patted the spot next to her on the couch. The blonde walked over and sat down, eyeing the jar the entire time. Is something wrong? She shook her head negatively before leaning over and resting it against Naruto's shoulder. Orochimaru-sama and Tsunade-sama stopped by not long before you got home, she murmured. Did they find out something else? No. He felt Mikoto's head shake again, this time against his shoulder. They said father had a request in his will that he added shortly after we were married. It wasn't on the will when they did the reading, or at least maybe he requested that it not be read in front of everyone. Regardless, this is part of his request. Mikoto gestured at the jar before grabbing Naruto's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. He wanted to offer you his eyes. The will said you don't have to accept, but that he was giving them to you, as he believed whatever quest you are on, having them would benefit you. Naruto felt as if all the air had been pushed out of his lungs. Kagami had left him the Sharingan. It wasn't something he felt that he really needed, but just the gesture alone, of course he appreciated it. It might help to have a trump card, but if he got it up to the Mangekyo he'd start to lose his eyesight. Since he wasn't born in Uchiha, he wouldn't have a relative to exchange eyes with either. Going blind was not something he would enjoy. Not to mention Kurama would probably hate him again. Naruto. Oh, sorry. I was lost in thought. Apparently. What do you think? Naruto sighed, and using his free hand he brushed it back through his spiky hair. Honestly, while I'm both shocked and grateful, I'm not too sure I want to try. Are you sure? He wasn't sure if he made the right choice, and Mikoto's neutral voice wasn't helping his decision either. Well, I know I have been around enough despair in the past to be able to unlock the Mangekyo rather easily, but I don't have a desire to lose my eyesight. Not only that, but I don't know what having Biju chakra in me would do, since the eyes wouldn't be a normal part of my body. Kurama isn't exactly fond of the Sharingan. I don't want to mess up our relationship by suddenly getting a set. Mikoto hummed for a moment, then lifted her head and moved over to kiss his cheek. I'll respect whatever you choose. Though, it would be a shame if you were to lose those blue eyes. Naruto, while inwardly relieved that Mikoto at least appeared to agree with him, turned his head to stare into the eyes of his wife. I didn't know you liked them that much. I love them. They stand out so much, and when we were first dating, whenever you stared at me it would give me the chills. Grinning slyly, he began to tease her a little. Oh, so they don't anymore then? His wife giggled a bit. Now they just make me hot when you stare at me. I'll have to remember that, then. I have to admit I wasn't a big fan of the Sharingan when I was younger, but they just look downright exotic on you. The small grin that was on her face began to grow larger, and her Sharingan immediately activated, the three tomo in each now red eye spinning in slow circles. He knew that she wasn't placing him in a genjutsu, not anything close, really, but he couldn't stop looking at her. You know, if you look at me like that, it's going to make me want to do things. Oh, what kind of things? Mikoto questioned. Naruto was looking at her face, though he could see her hands moving along the zipped-up jacket she was wearing. Things that used to make you blush when I referenced them, but now you seem to enjoy wholeheartedly, he murmured. Mikoto let out a moan as she moved from her seat, and leaned forward to place a smoldering kiss on his lips. Naruto was about to deepen it, but she pulled back almost immediately. She shifted off the couch and stood up in front of him, pulling the rest of her zipper down so that the front of the jacket opened. She had her chest wrapped, as she had taken to doing again in the last couple months or so as she got back into a normal training schedule. Interestingly enough, she hadn't used much wrap today. There was plenty of skin visible, and it didn't take much to get his imagination into gear. I need to get my mind off things. To start, I think that maybe I should take a bath. Would you be a dear and seal up this jar? We'll talk more about it later. Right now I'd like you to help me wash my back. Naruto reached up and made a grab for her, but Mikoto let out another giggle and dodged him, then made a beeline for the hallway that led to their room. When she realized he was going to actually do as she said and wasn't giving chase, she leaned back around the corner, taking off her jacket completely as she did so. Please be quick about it. I'd hate to get started without you, darling. I've been interested in trying out that scene from Jiraiya-sensei's manuscript. You know, the one with the soap suds and conveniently placed towels. Naruto never before sealed away anything faster than he did that jar. Somewhere in a bar in Rain Country, a white-haired man began cackling to himself for no reason at all. 4 months later. Damn it, get down you idiots. Do you want to lose your heads? Naruto grabbed the shoulders of the two shinobi in front of him, yanking them down to the ground forcefully just as several braces worth of shuriken flew through the air right where they were. The two shinobi he saved, one from Konoha, the other from Kumo, both stared at him with wide-eyed expressions, a mixture of shock and relief. Keep your heads down. We're on the front lines, damn it. We don't have the backup manpower for you to lose your heads here. I mean that literally. Getting shaky nods from the two, the blonde grunted and turned away, swiftly moving down the trench to where their fortified operations center was. He had been leading the push around the right side of the Iwa line, trying to get to their flank before being called back. He wasn't completely sure, but from what he could remember of the stories Kakashi told him, this sounded just like the final battle of the war. The entire zone was a complete stalemate so far. They were surrounded by stone and rock, which made things perfect for the Iwa forces. He had no idea how it went before, but this was hell. Not quite the hell he was used to during his reality, but then all war was hell anyway. Damn stubborn Unoki, why wouldn't the old man just surrender with most of his forces still intact? Not willing to dwell on the thoughts of what obviously wasn't going to happen at this point, Naruto instead wanted to end the war quickly with as little bloodshed as possible. He briefly contemplated asking Kushina if he could test the seal they had been working on and transferring Kurama's consciousness over to him, but was wary about risking it. So far he had been able to clearly send short thoughts and emotions over to Kurama, but the Biju had not been able to send him more than vague impressions back to him, or at least nothing coherent. Neither he nor Kushina could pinpoint what the problem was, and neither of them wanted to jeopardize Kurama's safety. Needless to say, Kurama was more amused about that than anything else. Naruto had to steady himself against the side of the trench he was in as a stronger technique set the ground moving underneath him. Luckily it didn't last long, and he was able to make good time, stepping over injured and dead bodies as he went. His heart went out to those he passed who were too injured to be saved, as it did during the last war. The few medics they had were doing their best to make the wounded as comfortable, or numb, as possible. Upon arrival at the command bunker, he took a look around to see who was present. It didn't take long for his eyes to meet those of Hatake Tsukumo, who immediately beckoned him over to a table that he was standing around along with a few others. Tsukumo, glad you could make it. Naruto tossed a resigned grin at the older man, who simply returned the greeting with a wry smile. Naruto, how goes things on your end? Tougher than I thought it would be. I've managed to keep my squad alive, but doing that while trying to move forward has proven to be more difficult than I thought it would be. This terrain works too much to Iwa's advantage. Indeed it does. Listen, we have a... Tsukumo was cut off as a loud explosion went off right above their heads. The ground, even the very air, shook from the sound, and pieces of dirt fell from the ceiling. A few shinobi that knew earth techniques who were in the room immediately set about reinforcing various areas of the walls and ceiling that looked weak. As I was saying, began Tsukumo again, a little louder this time, we have a plan to open them up a bit and make a bit of headway instead of being stuck in the current stalemate. This is the only path to the capital through the mountains, so we have no choice but to go this way. They obviously know it too, with how they're defending. Naruto nodded, looking around the room at the others who had started listening in. His eyes met Minato's for a few brief seconds before glancing at Kakashi, Nara Shikaku, and Akamaki Chusa. All of them appeared weary, but their eyes were bright and focused. They knew what they had to do. He offered a nod to them, which they all returned, though Naruto's eyes lingered a little longer on Kakashi than they did for any of the others. The boy was too young to be here on the front lines, but the Jonin had been just short of throwing a tantrum to get here. Thankfully his own students, as well as Obito and Rin, weren't as quick to want to jump into the fray, and instead were given assignments to guard the supply caravans. His thoughts were cut off as Tsukumo resumed speaking after the brief pause. A has a squad ready to punch through if we can at least distract them enough. Minato tells me one of your shadow clones came up to him, explaining that you might have an idea. Several, actually. Tsukumo made a gesture at the table. Go for it. At this point I think we're open for anything. Nodding again, Naruto looked over the table at the roughly drawn battlefield. The first thing he did was look for where he was trying to work around one of the flanks and expanded it a bit to show how far his team had made it. They probably could have gotten further, but they were likely figured out what they were trying to do, as in the last hour they hadn't really made any forward progress. Naruto had his hands full just trying to help keep his team alive. Glancing over the rest of the map, he started pointing at various places of the display and looking at people in the room, issuing them orders. Many of the Jonin that he didn't know well enough simply got orders to hold various places along the front line, performing diversionary tactics and make it look like they weren't pushing too hard. The majority of the forces, including the Jonin that he knew, were sent to the southern end to do a large push from there, drawing Iwa's attention. The main thing was keeping Iwa focused on him more than any other reason. Pulling it off would be difficult, because they had to make it look like a real push without having Iwa call their bluff. Meanwhile, Naruto was going to head back up to the northern end with Minato, and open up a hole for A and his squad. After he was done and Tsukumo agreed with the plan, albeit with a few minor adjustments, all the Jonin left to go carry out their orders. Tsukumo excused himself as well so that he could go inform A of what the plan was. Once they were alone, Naruto turned to Minato and offered him a grin. So, are you ready to introduce yourself as the Yellow Flash on a large scale? I guess. I've never used it to this degree before. Are you sure this is what I did before? Positive. Naruto chuckled. It's one of the things that cemented your position as Yondaime Hokage and made you a legend. But we didn't have help from Kumo before either, so I don't know how this is going to end up. You won't need to do as much this time, just be a distraction. I don't know what it was like before, but we're not actively trying to take lives here. Just keep them busy long enough for Cloud to make it through. Minato took a deep breath and did some stretches, trying to loosen himself up. It was true that he had never used the Hiraishin on such a large scale before. While Naruto had no idea how much the technique had been used in the alternate past, he was aware of hearing that it had almost single-handedly ended the war. When Minato was prepared, they both returned together to the northern edge of the line that their forces were holding. Naruto made a couple dozen shadow clones and each of them grabbed a handful of the Hiraishin kunai. As they were assigning positions to other members of the task force, A walked up with his own team. Naruto. Minato. Are we ready? Minato simply looked to Naruto, who nodded. Yes. Minato is going to use the Hiraishin to make you a path through to their support lines, which you should be able to cut off before continuing to the capital. I'll use my forces to follow behind you so we can completely encircle them, and hopefully force a battlefield surrender without too much more bloodshed. A frowned with slight distaste, obviously not a fan of stopping bloodshed, at least from what Naruto knew of the man from his time. However, there was no argument, and he simply ordered the rest of his team to follow him once Minato started. A was a firm believer in the way of the warrior, that you shouldn't stop until your enemy was beaten soundly. Not to say A was a bad man, because he wasn't, he just followed a different moral compass. Scant minutes later, Naruto was ordering his clones to the front lines and pulling the other shinobi back. There was a brief lull in combat before hundreds of tri-pronged kunai were hurled at incredible velocity towards the enemy lines. Many of the Iwa shinobi simply knocked away the kunai, not aware what they would lead to. Several even caught or picked one up, curious about the design. For many of them, it was the last thing they did as a shinobi. There was a quick flash of yellow that moved past Naruto, and started jumping around from place to place on the battlefield. It was only his own use of the technique in practice moving fast with Kurama's chakra that allowed him to follow Minato's path of pure death. He knew Minato would have liked to simply disable as many of the enemy as he could rather than killing them, but they needed to show they were serious. Hopefully a few deaths now meant a lot more people would be alive later. As soon as the yells and screams reached their ears, A took his squad and moved forward swiftly, through the opening Minato had made. Naruto and his clones followed behind, picking up the tri-prong kunai and throwing them further once again, continuing the path. Behind him followed the rest of his platoon, securing the areas that Minato had just cleared. Ai's team finally pulled out of sight, and once most of the Iwa shinobi in the area were either dead, injured, or surrendering, Minato finally stopped using the Haraishin only to nearly fall over, exhausted. As Naruto moved over to help him, the other blonde looked at him, his tired expression morphing into one of curiosity followed almost immediately by panic. Naruto, watch out! Minato shouted as he desperately tried to climb to his feet. At first he thought it was just an Iwa shinobi that had somehow managed to hide from him. Palming a kunai and preparing to move in a burst of speed, he had only managed to turn around halfway before catching a glimpse of something black and red. He immediately shifted into an offensive stance when he fully caught sight of Toby, only to see the space around the man's visible left eye start to swirl. Not even thinking about any potential consequences, he pulled on some of Kurama's chakra that was still inside him and attempted to take out the man by any means necessary. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to prepare enough, and Toby was already starting to pull Naruto out of existence. The blonde felt an odd twisting sensation as the space-time migration technique locked onto him, and the last thing he heard other than a slight whoosh noise was Minato's voice shouting his name. Naruto grunted as he landed, well, wherever here was. There was no sky, or ceiling as far as he could tell, everything above him and as far as he could see on the horizon was completely black. As a sharp contrast, he was standing on a bright, white rectangular block. It was actually one of many, many more blocks than he could ever hope to count, stretched out as far as he could see. Slowly climbing to his feet as he tried to clear the disorientation from his mind, the blonde had no idea where he was. It was probably something of Toby's creation, a place where he could move things and reclaim them whenever he wished. That meant he'd have to find a way to break out of here, if it was even possible. As far as he could tell, the only way in or out was through the use of the Mangekyo Sharingan, which no one had right now. At least, not that he was aware of. He didn't know if Toby had a legitimate Mangekyo or not, as he had never seen it, even during the war. He never fought the Edo Tensei, Madara either, but the two seemed so similar he believed that Toby was simply a shade of the original Madara, a resurrected version of the legendary Uchiha that was incomplete in some way. Sadly, they hadn't gotten to see behind the mask to tell the man's true identity, but oftentimes he knew more than anyone was comfortable with, especially when it concerned himself and Kakashi. Then other times he acted as if the two of them were barely worth his notice and was merely humoring them with a fight of some kind, but was otherwise simply content to let his minions do the work. So, you're the upstart that has caused me to have to adjust my plans. Tensing for a moment, Naruto realized that he still had his kunai in his hands and full access to his chakra. Unfortunately, this place was completely foreign to him, he had no idea what Toby was capable of. Perhaps it would be best to keep a level head for the time being and see how much information he could get out of him. Turning around, he eyed the cloaked man standing on another pillar across from where he was. Unlike the Toby from Naruto's time, though, this one had an eye hole on the left side of the mask, showing only a left eye. His hair, while still spiky, was much longer, coming down to below the shoulders, almost to mid-back. On top of that, this mask was painted red and had no spiral, though the top quarter of it was white. Hello, Toby. Long time no see. Well, for me, at least. The man across from him made no motion to indicate he was surprised in any way. However, Naruto was plenty surprised when he got his reply. Toby, I have no idea who that is. But I can assure you I am not him. Judging by your comment, we must have some similarities. How is he like me? Naruto's eyes narrowed. He dresses exactly like you, except his mask is orange and only his right eye is visible. The masked man paused for a moment, obviously thinking over what he had been told. Interesting. My thoughts immediately lead me to only one possible conclusion, though I know it is false. Therefore you know something I don't. That in turn lends credence to my opinion that you simply aren't from here, as you have managed to foil many of my plans before I've even managed to do more than get them started. Or perhaps it merely is an amazing coincidence. The blonde didn't want to give anything away, and refused to look at the man's eye, because he knew quite a lot about what the Sharingan was capable of. Your silence speaks for you more than any words you could possibly say. Though I admit I was hoping you'd be a little more cooperative. My aim is world peace, after all. It's a false peace. Naruto snarled, momentarily forgetting himself and looking at the man's mask. It places you in charge of people's lives, causing them to lose their free will. That's not life at all. Toby appeared to slouch slightly, and Naruto could hear the man sigh as he shook his head. In yet another surprise move, he grabbed the bottom of the mask and slowly lifted it up, pulling it up and over his head to reveal a rather ordinary-looking face. While he didn't immediately know who the man was, he was able to recognize that the man's facial structure was definitely Uchiha. The only other standout feature was that his right eye was closed for some reason. Do you recognize who I am? The blonde remained silent for a moment, silently pondering the question in his mind. While it wasn't anyone he recognized, he had heard enough stories about a certain Uchiha, both from his time and current reality, that he knew his guess was most likely the correct one. Uchiha Madara. If the man across from him was at all pleased with Naruto's deduction, he didn't show it. All he offered was a casual nod of his head. What's wrong with your right eye? The question left Naruto's mouth before he could stop it, but about all that was available to him at the moment was to pump Madara for as much information as the man was willing to share. I guess you could say. I'm letting someone borrow it. The Sharingan is a very useful tool, as I'm sure you're very well aware. And while it is more draining than the Sharingan, the Rinnegan also has its uses. Naruto's bright blue eyes squinted in focus as he absorbed the words that Madara spoke. He knew Toby from his time had access to the Rinnegan, but to know that it was currently available to the man in front of him had shivers running down his back. The worst part about all this was that Madara was pretty much an unknown quantity, at least assuming that Toby from his time was a different person. He'd never know for sure, but considering how young this Madara had looked, he'd never be able to know for sure, as he doubted the Uchiha across from him would be willing to clarify. Now I just need to figure out what to do with you. You know too much somehow, so it is a risk for me to leave you alone. Even if you married into the Uchiha clan, you are not one, but I know you were an Uzumaki, so you would still be of some use to me. However, you do not have their trademark red hair, therefore I wonder just how much of an Uzumaki you are. I would subvert you to my will, but I have a feeling it would take much more effort than it would be worth in the long run, not to mention you likely know many more secrets about these eyes than I am comfortable with. Since you knew not to look at my face when we first arrived, I am led to believe that you are very capable, and had I not caught you by surprise I would have had a rather intense fight on my hands. What's to stop me from killing you now? Naruto questioned, almost growling. Oh, you're more than welcome to try. However, the moment you show any signs of aggression I am more than willing to depart and simply leave you here. I admit I have not left anyone here for a large amount of time, so I am unaware of how time passes in this place. Maybe you will be my first experiment. Naruto had to forcefully restrain himself from wanting to jump across to the next pillar and beating the smug tone out of Madara. If he had to be honest with himself, he was stuck. The only one who could get him out of here was Madara, at least that he knew of. Having the Mangekyo was likely a requirement, and there was no active Mangekyo in the clan that he was aware of. I see you have calmed down. You're more than welcome to take a look around this place, though in all my times here I've never found it for better than anything but storage. For now though, since you're stuck here. Madara's voice trailed off and he placed the mask back over his face. I have some new planning to do. Before Naruto could utter a word, the world around the man's left eye began to twist and warp, and barely a second later he had disappeared. Frowning, the blonde took another look around, as if he expected Madara to suddenly attack him. When no attack came, however, he resigned himself to waiting and looking around. Maybe if he was lucky he'd find a way out of this place. Maybe. 1 week later, Mikoto squinted as she looked up into the sky, trying to gauge the time of day. She had agreed to meet Kushina here for some light sparring to keep her mind off things. Minato had returned roughly 4 days ago, bringing with him both good news and bad. The good news was that the war had officially been ended, and they didn't have to wipe out Iwa's entire army to do so. The bad news, however, it took a moment for Minato to even work up the courage to say it. Mikoto could easily see how tense he was, and the fact that he was looking at her only made a cold feeling of dread settle in her gut. Naruto, he's not dead as far as we know, but he's missing. I'm sorry, Mikoto. Part of her dread had swiftly changed to confusion, as she had no idea how someone like Naruto could simply go missing. But her question died on her lips when Minato simply shook his head, the sorrow evident on his features. I don't know how to explain it. One moment he was right there in front of me after successfully helping me with the Hiraishin, and the next moment there was someone behind wearing a black cloak and a mask I didn't recognize. I warned him to watch out, then there was a ripple in the air, and next I knew both Naruto and the masked man were gone. I couldn't sense him anywhere. The dread returned full force. Naruto had explained to her the techniques that he knew of from the Toby character in his future, and what happened matched up completely. No one else had the Mangekyo currently, so none would be able to potentially enter the area where Naruto was likely being held prisoner. It was only a small comfort that her husband was likely still alive, but there was no telling when she'd see him again. Both Minato and Kushina had tried the best to comfort her over the past several days, though it was clear that the other two were fighting their own feelings about the loss of Naruto. The three of them plus Hiruzen and Hakumo had done the best to keep Naruto's disappearance on the down low, but it was only a matter of time before people started asking questions. The Uchiha clan had already begun to pester her. After all, even if he was on assignment, as the second person in line to take over the clan should something happen to her, they had a right to know his whereabouts and send backup if needed. Watch out. The noise of metal hitting metal brought Mikoto out of her thoughts, and she quickly fell into a defensive posture as she looked around. Awake now. Mikoto's head finally settled on her red-haired friend who had a kunai on the ground near her feet as well as one in each hand, glaring at someone. Her eyes quickly focused on the man standing at what he probably considered a safe distance. He was completely draped in a black cloak, and had shaggy black hair that looked to be longer than her own. The most obvious feature about him was his blood-red mask that was white on top with one eye hole on the left side of it. Who are you? How did you get here? She heard Kushina shout towards the cloaked man. Oh, no one important. I thought it would be nice of me to bring back someone I needed to borrow at the end of the war. Mikoto quickly squelched the feeling of hope that began to rise up in her. To get Naruto back would be amazing, but there was no telling what kind of condition he was in. Before she or Kushina could say or ask anything further, there was a rippling sensation in the air right in front of the masked man, just like Minato had described. To her amazement, Naruto seemed to appear right there, as if from nothingness. Her husband didn't really appear to be any worse for wear, other than a few dirty spots on his clothes that he likely picked up during the battles. However, he was already starting to tumble forward and shield his face as he squinted. Wherever he was being held must have been dark. She made to move forward to assist him, as he was obviously rather disoriented. Mikoto heard Kushina moving right next to her, but they were both stopped short by the voice of the masked man before they'd made it more than halfway there. Unfortunately for you, I didn't say what kind of condition I would leave him in. Mikoto felt her own heart stop as she watched in horror as a blade pierced through Naruto from the back of his chest, only to stick out from the front, dripping blood. Right through where his heart was. Her eyes quickly traveled from the sword sticking out of his chest to his face, only to see his bright blue eyes looking at her in confusion and pain. It felt like an eternity passed in that one moment before Naruto's body started to pitch forward and their eyes broke contact. The Uchiha matriarch stood there, helpless, as her husband fell to his knees as the masked man released the sword, then tilted and fell to his side. Her mind tried to process a million thoughts in those brief seconds as she watched her husband be killed right in front of her. Her mind barely registered as Kushina began to scream next to her, running forward again and calling out the name of her brother now, son in another time. She wanted to do the same herself, to run over and believe he wasn't dead, and merely injured. However, for some reason she couldn't tear her eyes away from the man wearing the mask, who seemed to be staring impassively at the blonde on the ground in front of him, as if impassively watching the death of a lower life form. It wasn't until she heard what the man said, though, that she finally snapped free from her stupor. Well, the blade certainly serves its purpose, but I still prefer a battle fan. Perhaps it was the seemingly nonchalant way that he spoke, or the smugness that just seemed to be dripping from his entire being. However, she knew that she would never, ever, allow anyone to so casually disregard her husband and all he stood for. In his past, in their present, and in the future. Something inside her snapped, and rage unlike anything Mikoto had ever felt before let something out of her that she wasn't even aware she had been holding back. Time itself seemed to stop, and other than the fact that the masked man had shifted his gaze to look at her now, she was unaware of anything else. For that man to so casually disregard everything she had fought for, everything she wanted, everything she loved. There was immense pressure behind her eyes, and a tickling sensation began trailing down her cheeks, much like tears that weren't wiped away. A word began to repeat over and over again in her mind, and before Mikoto was fully able to comprehend what exactly it was, she registered her own voice shouting that word for everyone to hear. Susanoo. Previously, something inside her snapped, and rage unlike anything Mikoto had ever felt before let something out of her that she wasn't even aware she had been holding back. Time itself seemed to stop, and other than the fact that the masked man had shifted his gaze to look at her now, she was unaware of anything else. For that man to so casually disregard everything she had fought for, everything she wanted, everything she loved. There was immense pressure behind her eyes, and a tickling sensation began trailing down her cheeks, much like tears that weren't wiped away. A word began to repeat over and over again in her mind, and before Mikoto was fully able to comprehend what exactly it was, she registered her own voice shouting that word for everyone to hear. Susanoo. Chapter 16. Kushina stopped charging forward as she saw a huge, purple, thing appear around her best friend. She wasn't sure what it was, but the chakra which formed the monstrosity appeared to completely encircle Mikoto and formed some sort of skeleton, the likes of which was nothing she had ever seen before. Mikoto had shouted out the word Susanoo, apparently the name of this new technique. Strangely, Kushina had never seen her best friend perform it before now, though she was aware of rumors that the Sharingan could let the Uchiha do some strange things. Whatever it was, the chakra pressure from her best friend was steadily increasing, but it felt dark and tainted. The redhead was somewhat adept at sensing chakra signatures, and Mikoto's was doing yet another thing she had never felt before now. Any further thoughts on the subject were cut short as the purple skeleton moved, swinging a strange-looking sword in a wide downward arc. It didn't impact the ground, but it did force the masked man to take several quick hops backwards so that he wouldn't be hit. Kushina. Startled, it took the redhead a moment to realize that Mikoto was calling her name. Why yeah, Mikoto ne. Get Naruto out of here. Please. Kushina quickly darted forward, trying to pretend that she didn't hear Mikoto's voice break when she said Naruto's name. Coming to an abrupt halt at the blonde's prone form, she tried to hold back her grief at the sight until he was moved out of the way from whatever it was that his wife wanted to do. Carefully shifting him so as to not potentially make his seemingly lethal injury worse, she moved her hands and arms under his shoulder blades and knees. Boosting her strength and speed with chakra reinforcement, the redhead grunted for a moment as she adjusted to his extra weight while trying not to stare at the sword in his chest, then quickly moved over to the far side of the clearing. She kept an eye on the masked man, though to both her relief and worry he appeared to be more interested in what Mikoto was doing. Glancing at her friend once again, she noticed that her Susanoo was no longer a skeleton, but appeared to be fully fleshed out, with a face that looked to have a cruel grimace on it. The sword it was holding was now somehow alight with what looked to be fire, but it was black and didn't give off any light, yet something else she had never seen before. Mikoto let out a yell and moved forward, but Kushina forced herself to stop watching for a moment as she set Naruto carefully back down on the ground. The sword was still in him, unfortunately she was afraid to move it as it might cause more damage or cause him to start bleeding in earnest. Clumsily pressing her shaking fingers against the side of his throat, she finally lost the battle with her tears as she searched in vain for a heartbeat, as if the sword sticking out from his chest didn't send enough of a message. Kurama, can you think of or do anything? There was a brief rumbling in the back of her mind before the deep voice of the Nine Tails became clear. Lift up his shirt and place your hand against the seal on his stomach. If his chakra network is at all still active, I may be able to sustain him with chakra alone for a little while until a medic gets here. The redhead didn't need to be told twice, as she immediately unzipped his blood-stained Jonin vest, then quickly lifted up the mesh underlay while trying to ignore the quickly crusting blood that had run down his chest towards his abdomen. Placing her hand directly over his navel, she pumped as much of both her own and Kurama's chakra into the seal as she could. At first, there was a spark of hope as the hidden seal on Naruto's stomach immediately appeared. The dark spiral was a sharp contrast to his quickly paling skin. A loud yell from Mikoto and a large explosion almost sent both her and Naruto flying, but some quick chakra adjustments kept her stuck to the ground while holding onto and protecting what she could of her brother's body. She wasn't able to tell what Kurama was doing, but as the seconds turned into a minute, and then two, despair once more began to set in. She had tried focusing on what Mikoto and the masked man were talking and yelling to each other about over the explosions, but her mind seemed to be unable to focus on any one task. It was when the Nine Tails spoke again, however, that the world around her seemed to stop existing as reality was brought to a fine point, directly in front of her. I'm sorry, Kushina, there's nothing I can do. Kurama's deep voice rumbled in her mind. Believe me, I wish I could. That pronouncement was followed by a deep sigh. I have only ever wished for three things in my long life. That the old man didn't have to die, that I had my freedom from being used as a tool for many years, and now this. Kushina wanted to wail, to scream and yell, to let the world know about her loss. But for the moment, all she could feel was numb. Even though he was dead and still had the sword stuck through the middle of his torso, she removed her hand from his abdomen, and instead cradled his head in her lap as if it were a precious and delicate object. Another loud commotion brought her half-hearted attention back to the fight between her best friend and her brother's killer, but a voice she had never heard before spoke up behind her before she could figure out what was going on. What happened here? Naruto blinked as his eyes opened, or at least he thought he blinked. It was hard to tell, as it was completely black around him, and there wasn't any light as far as he could tell. Looking down, he realized that he could see himself, as if he was a light source, though he didn't appear to give off any ambient light as he couldn't see anything else around him. Unlike being stuck in Madara's world, as he had come to call it, there were no large pillars of white all around him either. It was a total void. There was nothing but darkness for as far as he could see, not to mention for all intents and purposes the surface he was standing on was invisible as well. Trying to assess his situation, he replayed his most recent memories in his mind. He was hit with a sharp pain in his head and crumpled to his knees as what he believed to be the last moments of his life replayed with almost painful clarity. One moment, he was exhausted and tired but unable to sleep for some reason in Madara's world. Though there was no way to tell how much time had passed in that place, it felt like an eternity. It was as if something was giving him the energy to stay awake, while at the same time making sleep impossible as a result. It was maddening, and if he had been stuck in there any longer he might have truly gone mad before long. That was one of the reasons why when he felt the sudden twist of his reality being changed, he was at first excited to meet that change, regardless of where it would put him. As his vision had stabilized in the new area, a blue sky was the first thing he saw, and his heart leaped at the sight. Then he noticed how much brighter it all was, and moved to shield his eyes from the sunlight that he hadn't seen in what felt like forever. His squinting eyes rested on Mikoto for barely a second before he heard Madara's voice behind him. The blonde couldn't remember what the man said exactly, as there was a sharp pain in the middle of his chest. He watched as his wife's face morphed from amazement, to fear, then to panic, and finally what appeared to be grief mixed with anger in what was likely a span of a couple seconds. At first it confused him, but then the pain from his chest got worse, and he looked down only to see a sword sticking out of it. Darkness quickly started seeping up from the corners of his vision, and before he knew it he could no longer find the strength to remain standing. Naruto's eyes had closed completely at some point, though his mind was fuzzy on exactly when. In actuality, it felt like he simply closed his eyes for a brief moment before he opened them again, to find himself where he was now, standing up once more. The moment he wondered what to do now, a faint sound resembling a laugh came from behind him. Quickly turning around, he examined the area, only to see what appeared to be a faint light off in the distance. It was impossible to tell just how far away it was, but looking around one more time made him realize that there really wasn't anything else he could see. Steeling himself as he let out a sigh, the blonde took a step forward, followed by another, slowly making his way towards the light. He was unsure as to if there was an end anywhere to the apparently non-existent surface he was walking on, but as Naruto continued his travels towards the light, his mind began wandering towards the what-ifs. Such as, what if this is what people referred to when they were dying or dead as, walking towards the light? He began to ponder different scenarios as he got closer, only for his thoughts to lean more towards curiosity as the one light he originally saw became two, and then several more after that. By the time he got close enough to identify the various lights, however, he just knew his eyes had to be playing tricks on him. The scene was surprisingly familiar, in an eerie sort of way. There were plenty of little things that just made the entire thing appear wrong, as though someone had changed a few minor details here and there just to try to mess him up. The worst part about it all was the two people sitting at the table in front of him, both of them giving him small, reserved smiles while obviously waiting for him to talk first. After staring at them for a few seconds, he took a deep breath and realized that he would have to be the one to make the first move. Minato. Kushina. What are you two doing here? Mikoto screamed in frustration as her Amaterasu-coated sword once again went right through the masked man's body without him having to dodge at all. It was as if she was just swinging through air. Well, for being the current leader of the clan, I must admit I was expecting more than this. She knew deep down he was just goading her on. At this point, she just didn't care. There was only one objective she had right now, and that was to see the man in front of her die. Even if she died along the way, he was going down. Her thoughts briefly turned to Itachi, and her friends. She knew that Kushina and Minato would raise Itachi well, and they would certainly get help from the clan. But the monster in front of her had to die, because if he didn't, no one would be safe. Naruto's passion to see this man dead to save everyone else had been cemented in her long ago. He never directly asked her to help him, but he was so passionate about it, especially after hearing the horror stories of his time, that she couldn't help but get swept up in it as well. She didn't want to die, no one did, at least no one that she knew of. Mikoto wasn't afraid of death, but that wasn't to say she was actively seeking it, either. Judging by the hard time she was having so far, however, it was unlikely she'd make it through this in one piece. The Uchiha matriarch was a realist, it was one of the things that Naruto always claimed to love about her. Of course, thoughts of her recently deceased husband reignited her rage, and she felt another burst of power surge through her system. That's better. Come now, let's dance a little. The raven-haired woman tried to lay a multi-layered genjutsu on the area, though against her opponent she had no idea if it would work. When she sent another bolt of black fire at him and he dodged this time, she guessed it might have been working a little, as he made an effort to move this time instead of letting it go right through him. Any further considerations were cut short as he pulled a battle fan out of nowhere and seemed to glide through the air, taking a swing at her. She brought the sword of her Susanoo around to deflect the blow, but much to her surprise she was pushed back instead of stopping his momentum. He chuckled as he glided down to the ground. Do you know who I am, woman? Mikoto glared at the man as she panted slightly. Her cheeks were both itching, so she wiped at him, only to see the back of her hand come away bloody. I think it's fairly obvious who you are, bastard. To her displeasure, he simply chuckled again and shook his head, then reached up and pulled off the mask, tossing it to the ground. Well, since I'm guessing the dead blonde told everyone who I am at this point, I no longer need to hide my face. It's much earlier than I had planned, but I guess I might as well start my conquests today by killing you and sending the Uchiha clan into disarray. Mikoto continued to glare at Madara. Konoha is much stronger than just the Uchiha. He leaped forward again, surprising her by getting inside her guard and smashing his fan against Susanoo's chest. Mikoto yelped in pain as it felt like a blow against her own chest, even if it was probably blunted. Her technique flickered for a moment as she was sent crashing into a nearby tree. You give that village too much credit. It's nothing but a shadow of its once brief, great existence. Hashirama began to dilute its power as he tried to elevate the status of every other village out there. Madara slowly stalked forward as Mikoto gradually climbed back to her feet, Susanoo quickly solidifying around her once more. Perhaps I will give you one chance. Impress me enough and I'll allow you to join my side on the quest for permanent peace. Mikoto wasn't sure what he was expecting, but judging by the look on Madara's face when she did it, he didn't believe she would burst out laughing. Even if her ribs were already hurting, it was worth it just for that sight alone. I wouldn't follow you in a million years, she chuckled. Your peace is meaningless because no one will have free will. She wasn't entirely sure, but it sounded for a moment like Madara actually growled. She wasn't able to bask in the moment for long, however, as he came charging at her once again. The two sitting at the table in front of Naruto glanced at each other for a moment, seemingly sharing a conversation in their minds before one of them chuckled and slowly rose from the table. Well, I can't say I recall any other child calling their parents by their name in such a manner, but if it's what you're comfortable with, I guess I can let it slide for now. The redhead stopped a couple short paces away from Naruto, giving him a slight smile as her head tilted a little to the side. The way she was standing and looking at him expectantly, combined with the clothing she was wearing, the Kushina in his time hadn't worn anything like that yet. Mom. She nodded slowly before opening her arms, and in barely more than a second he had moved forward to embrace her tightly. As much as he tried to stop them, he could feel the tears working their way into the corners of his eyes. A rather loud sniff from him caused his mother to chuckle as she stepped back from him. Are you really going to cry? It's not like it's been that long since you saw me, ya no. Naruto's eyes went wide before they quickly narrowed in confusion. Wait, aren't you? If you're my mother, then. Catching him by surprise, this time it was Minato who answered him. What your mother means, Naruto, is that we're your parents from your original timeline. Naruto looked back and forth between his parents, noticing that they did look slightly older than he remembered them from where he was from. It answered some questions, but started a whole lot more too. How? Minato and Kushina looked at each other again before shrugging. We aren't sure either, his mother answered. We can't remember anything before arriving right here. Strangely, we didn't really feel like it had been all that long since we saw each other, and it feels like I just saw you moments ago trying to take control of the Kyuubi. Naruto stared at his mother curiously as she gestured to an empty chair at the table as she moved back towards her own. Without a word he moved over and sat down, only to look back and forth between his parents curiously for another moment. His eyes briefly passed over other areas of the room they were in, taking in as many details as he could. There were 3 walls, a floor, and even a ceiling and a window that showed what he recognized as Konoha on a sunny day. All that was missing was the wall from where he entered. The room itself was literally a carbon copy of Minato's, the younger one, current apartment, minus a few little changes here and there. So, Naruto scratched at his cheek for a moment, trying to figure out what to ask. Are you two aware of how I got here? The mood at the table immediately adopted a rather somber tone, both of his parents nodding while his father looked distinctly unhappy. You were killed, as best we can tell, his father explained. I don't know how, but we were given a sort of strange third-person's view about most of the major events in your life up until this moment. Kushina nodded as her husband spoke, though in contrast to him, she looked to be having a hard time keeping a straight face. Naruto noticed, and when he simply raised an eyebrow, she couldn't help but grin. Mikoto nay, Naruto. Really. Even though they had been married for a while, Naruto felt himself rubbing at the back of his head as a blush started creeping up his face. Hey now, it just sort of happened. I honestly wasn't trying. He stopped talking as Kushina failed to keep a hold on her giggles. Naruto's abashed face quickly transformed into a mild scowl, while Minato simply looked on with a small, amused smile. I think that she's very happy for the both of you, though she doesn't know quite how to express that. Kushina hummed and nodded happily as Minato continued, while I have to admit thinking of it as, well, odd, the Mikoto I knew and was on a genin team with did end up in a marriage with Fugaku. The Mikoto you and our alternate selves know is definitely much, much happier. Really? Naruto asked, looking happy again. Both of his parents nodded with smiles on their faces, but it was Kushina who answered him. Thank you for saving my best friend, Naruto. My Mikoto only had flashes of happiness, and that was mostly when it was just her and Itachi. It was wonderful to see that I didn't lose my friend this time. He wasn't sure what to say, but instead settled for returning the smile. In fact, he really wasn't sure what more to talk about at all just yet. His death had been so sudden and he was still trying to piece it all together. When something fluttered by the window, however, his eyes were immediately drawn to it, looking outside. It didn't take long for his attention to shift from the window over to the door next to it. Getting curious, he looked around the room again, noticing that other than the wall that was absent, so were 2 more doors that he knew led to the bedroom and a storage closet. What is it? Naruto's head turned back to look at Minato, who had asked the question. At first he just shrugged, but when his father's penetrating stare didn't let up, he figured that he should probably explain. I was just wondering why there is a window and a door on that wall, but 2 other doors from this room are missing. Not to mention the entire wall from where I entered. Once again his parents shared a look between them, and much like last time, Kushina answered, you don't want to go through that door, Naruto. What? Why? I. Kushina's face went through a collection of expressions as her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. What I think your mother is trying to say and failing at, Minato managed to ignore the redhead as she sent him a glare, is that we both know, and yet don't know what is behind the door. It has a strong sense of familiarity, yet at the same time I don't really know what's beyond there. All I do know is that when I woke up here, I had a strong urge to keep you from entering. He's right, Naruto. As the young man turned back to look at his mother, she only offered him a sad smile. We discussed this briefly, but as far as we can tell, we're here to stop you from going any further just yet. The only thing we don't know is why. Kushina stared with wide eyes at the young man standing next to her. He was rather gaunt looking, so she had a hard time guessing his age, but would place it to be somewhere in his late 20s to early 30s. Other than that, there were two other things that really stood out to her. First was that he had red hair that came down to his shoulders. Secondly was his eyes. They were like nothing she had ever seen before, yet at the same time they matched up with the exact same rumors she had heard of passed down from her ancestors. Rumors that Mikoto and Naruto had surprisingly decided to confirm were correct, but neither of them really explained anything more beyond confirmation of existence before the subject was dropped or changed. She didn't really remember, and now wasn't the time for introspection. Wah, who are you? The new arrival stared at her for barely a moment before his unique eyes shifted from her to the body in front of her. I was one of Jiraiya-sensei's first students, though I understand he hadn't told anyone of us other than his own teammates. He got me to come here by telling me a rather fantastic story, including some facts that he felt I had to see to truly believe. If he was going to say anything more, it was cut off by yet another arrival. Kushina. Hearing Minato's voice, she tensed, turning her tear-stained face to look at her boyfriend. At first he was looking worried, but as he ran closer she could see it quickly morph from disbelief to shock as he got closer. Minato completely ignored the other redhead, so she could only guess that he already knew. It wasn't long before his gaze shifted from her to Naruto. What happened? He asked. It looked like he was doing everything he could to rein in all the emotions he was feeling, but it was quickly failing. Mad. Madara. She couldn't keep the slight hiccup out of her voice as she came close to bursting into tears again, one of her hands gripping tightly onto Naruto's vest. All it took was that one name for Minato's eyes to snap quickly into focus as his anger surged to the forefront. Kushina watched as his hands rapidly clenched and released, while at the same time his lips morphed into a snarl that she had never seen him have before. With a look over his shoulder to where Mikoto and Madara were still fighting, he murmured that he'd be back before disappearing in a flash of yellow. A throat clearing brought Kushina's head back around to the front, only to stare at the other redhead once again. Instead of looking up at him as before, however, he had since crouched down and had a hand resting on Naruto's chest. As I was saying before, Jiraiya-sensei mentioned that I might want to come here to meet some people that I thought I no longer had. His gaze shifted from Naruto's form to her face. Judging from the color of your hair, as well as what Jiraiya-sensei has told me, you must be Uzumaki Kushina. Kushina simply blinked, then slowly nodded. The newcomer returned the gesture, before looking back down and asking another question. Who is this? My brother, Naruto. The other man's lips pressed into a fine line as he stared at the sword still sticking out of Naruto's chest. Can you lift up his torso? We need to get this sword out of him. Kushina simply stared at the other man, blinking owlishly before her hands clenched against Naruto's vest once again, unconsciously pulling his body closer in a possessive gesture. The man must have noticed this, as he sighed a little before looking her in the eyes. I came here in search of family. My name is Uzumaki Nagato. Kushina simply blinked at him, again. She looked down at Naruto again, briefly, before shifting back up to stare at Nagato once more. As if knowing Kushina wasn't altogether at the moment, the other redhead offered her a somewhat small, reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'm a medic. Mikoto groaned as she struggled to pick herself back up. Her Susanoo technique was starting to flicker and fade around its extremities, not to mention it had switched back to a skeletal figure. While she still felt as though she had the power to handle it, she wasn't sure if her body could take much more. As she tried to climb back up to her feet, her right knee gave out on her, causing her to stumble back to the ground. Hearing the faint sound of Madara chuckling once again, she couldn't help but growl quietly. The man was downright infuriating. Out of her peripheral vision she noticed as he casually moved over a pile of random rubble, lifting a foot and placing it on a felled tree trunk. Leaning forward and resting the arm that wasn't holding his battle fan on top of his thigh, he peered over at her. I have to admit, you've put up a better fight than I thought you would. You have my begrudging respect, though you are still nowhere near my level. Or Hashirama's for that matter. She idly wondered what a dead man had to do with any of this, though the stories of how many times the two men fought to a stalemate popped into the forefront of her mind. Not to mention the battle at what they named the Valley of the End. Grunting, she slowly managed to climb back to her feet, reinforcing her bad knee with chakra so that it hopefully wouldn't give out on her again. Ready for more? Very well, let's. Madara's comments were cut off as he quickly phased out of existence, a yellow blur passing directly through him, coming to a stop next to Mikoto, but still outside of the glowing aura of Susanoo. Mikoto, you need to go. Everyone's coming, I'll take care of this for now until they get here. Mikoto turned her head and glared at her old friend and teammate, actually causing him to take a half step backward. Like hell I'm going anywhere. This bastard killed my husband. But you're in no shape too. Minato had to flash away as Madara brought his fan down right where the blonde had been standing, causing the ground to crack open slightly and making Mikoto stumble backwards. Now, children, Madara chastised, you shouldn't ignore your betters. That's very rude. Several kunai impacted the ground near where Madara was standing, and as the man looked down at them there were several flashes of yellow that surrounded him. Mikoto could barely follow, but it appeared as if the aged Uchiha blocked some attacks with his fan, while still phasing out of existence for others. To Mikoto's shock and horror, Madara simply swung his fan at one point and it managed to hit Minato, obviously stunning the blonde as he let out a yell and went flying, crashing into the ground and tumbling a couple more times until he came to a stop, groaning. Well, I have to admit, that was a lucky hit. Now for a finisher, how about Amaterasu? Mikoto moved as quickly as she was able, sticking out the sword of her Susanoo so that Madara's Amaterasu was absorbed harmlessly into hers, protecting a Minato who had stopped about halfway from getting to his feet as he stared at the large sword of fire that had just protected him. How do you know Amaterasu? Madara simply stared at her for a moment before shaking his head. The clan must have fallen further than I thought. A retort was on the tip of Mikoto's tongue, but a glare and a sudden shot of killing intent almost made her bite her tongue in shock. Just how powerful was this man? It was like there was no end to what he was capable of. As I was going to say before you were about to interrupt me, the Sharingan is an amazing tool. When my brother died and I took his eyes, not only did I get my sight back, but I also got every technique that he learned using his eyes. It's as if they have a memory of their own. Not only that, but the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan has the ability to copy and use the ability of any other Mangekyo Sharingan. Another amazing thing is that there are several techniques that every Uchiha starts with that they will automatically know how to use when the situation arises, the least of which are Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo. Didn't you ever wonder? The smile on Madara's face was nearly feral, it sent shivers down Mikoto's spine. She actually hadn't seen him with even a hint of one on his face before now. She didn't like it at all. She knew what Tsukuyomi was thanks to Naruto, but her husband didn't know how to perform it. He had only been brought into it before. The tablet in the Uchiha shrine mentioned that there were 5 techniques gifted to every pair of eyes, but not what they were. Her eyes couldn't read the entire tablet anyway, so there may have been a description elsewhere. There was a lot that Naruto had shared with her, courtesy of the Itachi from his time, but since he didn't have the Sharingan he couldn't apply any of it and show her. The arrival of more people to the current battlefield broke Mikoto's current train of thought, and one of the first things she noticed was that Madara's expression had evened out again. Taking a quick look around, she saw that the Sandaime Hokage had landed next to her and was alternating between examining what she was doing and trying to gauge what had been going on in the area around them. On her other side, both of the Hokage's old teammates and current advisors landed. A little in front of her and off to the side she spotted both Shimura Danzo, Hitaki Sakumo, and several members of Anbu. To the other side was the members of the Densetsu no Sanin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru. Altogether, they had pinned Madara into the center of their formation, though to Mikoto's quickly growing horror the Uchiha didn't look worried in the least. In contrast, he was actually starting to look amused. What are you doing, Madara? We thought you were dead. Mikoto heard the Hokage shout out from next to her. As usual, the man simply chuckled. As if Hashirama could truly finish me. The man was truly too kind-hearted for his own good. Your age has long since passed. You should not be here anymore. This time, Madara simply snorted. My age will never pass. Not until I achieve the ultimate peace. Peace through power. I'll become a god if I have to, and I'll be making you my first subjects. As if to put an exclamation point on his speech, he stared right at Mikoto and smirked. First, though, I need to take out the trash. The current Uchiha matriarch heard several shouts, a few of which were her name, but she was paying more attention to a rather pronounced whisper in her head. She didn't have much time to contemplate it, however, before she let out a scream as she found herself being hit by a large, blunt object and was promptly sent sailing backward. She let out another strangled cry as her back impacted against something that she hoped was a tree because of how loud the cracking noise was. The whisper in her mind grew louder right before her body went numb and she quickly succumbed to the darkness. So you don't know what it is, but I'm not supposed to go there. What the hell am I supposed to do then? We don't know, sorry. But we're under the impression that it isn't quite your time to move on just yet. Naruto rubbed his face with his hands, feeling rather incredulous about this entire situation. On one hand he was upset to know that he was dead, leaving behind a vulnerable Mikoto, Itachi, and Konoha. Sure, he had made it stronger, but he was expecting to have a few more years yet before he'd actually have to deal with the threat that was Madara and the Akatsuki. On the other hand, it was nice that he got to meet both of his real parents for a change, even if he had long gotten over the feeling that he'd likely never see them again. This current arrangement came as a pleasant surprise in that aspect. But now he was essentially stuck in limbo. Unable to move on, but not aware of any way to get back either. In a rather strange twist of fate, his parents weren't of much help, either. Right as another question was about to leave his mouth, both of his parents looked sharply out into the vast blackness that was outside the little room. Do you feel that, Kushina? His mother simply nodded, before standing up from the table and quickly moving over to grab Naruto in a quick hug. Mom. She pulled back, tears forming in the corner of her eyes. It seems your time has come to return. Naruto's eyes widened a bit, and he looked around her into the vast expanse, but not seeing anything. Are you sure? I don't see anything. We're sure. I don't know how, but I for one can just feel it, Minato commented. Naruto stood and looked to his father, who had also moved over to him and was holding out one of his hands. As he grabbed Minato's hand, the slightly older man pulled his son into a one-armed hug. I don't think it really needs to be said, but we just want you to know that we're both incredibly proud of you. Naruto felt his own eyes beginning to tear up as he stepped back from his father. Kushina moved over and placed her arm around Minato's waist, while he placed one over her shoulder. When you get back and kick Madara's ass, make sure you give me lots more grandbabies after, okay? Her son simply blinked at her owlishly for a moment before a small grin crossed his face. How many? Kushina pretended to think. Oh, I don't know. 9 total, perhaps. The two of them shared a smile as Minato snorted and rolled his eyes. Almost immediately after, Naruto found his body to be surrounded by a white glow that was steadily growing brighter. Realizing that this was what his parents sensed, he waved goodbye, to which they did the same in return with their free hands. As Naruto closed his eyes when the light got too bright, the last thing he heard was his mother shouting that she loved him, and that she'd better not see him again too soon. Kushina watched fretfully as her kinsman performed some strange technique after pulling the sword of Naruto's body. She didn't actually see anything happen, but shortly after he did it, a green glow surrounded the blonde, followed immediately by his mouth opening as he took a deep breath. It was all the redhead could do to keep from squealing in both shock and joy, but somehow she managed. With a grateful glance at a slightly tired-looking Nagato, she propped Naruto's head up into her lap as she waited for him to open his eyes. Thankfully, it didn't take long. Ugh, what hit me? The young woman felt the tears start to fall from her eyes again, though this time it was in happiness rather than sadness. As Naruto's bright blue eyes opened, she tried to smile for him, but her lips were trembling too much to pull it off. As if sensing her feelings, the blonde surprised himself at how quickly he was able to shift to his knees and pull her into a hug just as she began bawling into his chest. Feeling horrible for the shock he must have put her through, not to mention Mikoto, he began to take stock of the situation as he tried to figure out where his wife currently was. Before he got very far, however, another presence moved around into his line of sight. Naruto found himself doing a double take as he gaped for a moment. Nagato. The redhead gave him a tight smile and a brief nod. It would seem that what Jiraiya-sensei told me is true. Naruto blinked at him for a moment before what really happened dawned on him. You used Rinja-tensei, didn't you? Nagato appeared to be momentarily surprised before nodding once again. Thanks. The other redhead offered a small shrug this time. It's the least I could do for another Uzumaki. That brought Naruto up short. After all this time, it had never crossed his mind. Conan never said anything, so perhaps the Nagato from his time never told her his family name. You're one too. All Nagato did was point at his hair, as if that was enough of an answer. Right, I'm an idiot. He both felt and heard Kushina giggle against his chest, which served as a quick reminder that he was still holding her. Leaning back slightly as he released her, she made a show of wiping away at her face to clean it up before giving him a fierce stare. Don't you ever do that to me, or anyone else, ever again. The blonde simply gave her a flat look before sighing and shaking his head. I don't know if anyone can ever make that promise, but I can promise to put forth my best effort. Kushina gave him a timid smile before sighing. I guess that is all anyone can hope for. The moment she finished speaking, a large explosion made the three of them look in the direction of the source, only to see a massive amount of fire and water being thrown about, along with a lot of debris. The fight was definitely still going on. Well, perhaps we should go help them take care of Madara. Are you ready to fight with Kyuubi? Kushina looked pensive for a moment before her face settled on a determined expression, and she nodded quickly. Naruto returned the nod as he rose to his feet, offering his hand to his sister to help her up as well. Upon standing up completely, he turned to Nagato. If you want to stay here and out of the fight, I'd understand. As much as we could use your help, this isn't really your battle. To his surprise, Nagato offered a small smile and shook his head negatively. Actually, the reason Madara is here now is mostly my fault. I will help you as well, though I admit I'm not as good a ninja as my two best friends. My eyes just allow me to do different things. Wait, what do you mean you're responsible for Madara being here? Nagato looked away towards where the battle was happening for a few brief seconds before staring at Naruto once again. It was just under 2 years ago, I think. He sent a messenger of some sort to bring me to his location. I was curious about his message, so I went. When I first saw him, he was an old man and claimed that he was the one who had given me these eyes when I was younger. I didn't believe him at first, but he managed to convince me since he was able to tell me my entire family history. Supposedly I was given these eyes when I was 3. He mentioned the Rinya Tensei to me, but wasn't surprised that I already knew the technique. He claimed if I resurrected him into a new body he had prepared after he died, that he would help me attain the peace I long for. Nagato trailed off for a moment, looking back and forth between Naruto and Kushina, realizing that they were totally engrossed with his story so far. Taking a deep breath, he continued, "So I did it. I haven't heard from him since I brought him back, but he claimed that he had quite a few plans to put into motion first. Then Jiraiya Sensei arrived. I was happy to see him, of course, it had been a while. Until he started explaining what was really going on. At first I didn't want to listen to him, but gradually what he was telling me began making too much sense. Then when we were alone, he confirmed Naruto was from the future and really knew what was going on, and that I still had family, living blood relatives, here in Konoha." Nagato made a slow, sweeping gesture around them. "Now, here I am. I suggest that we get moving before Madara does too much more damage." Madara held his battle fan in a relaxed pose as he examined his surroundings. After dealing with the current Uchiha clan head and the upstart Yondaime Hokage, the others were making things difficult, but not to any large extent. It was definitely no warm-up. Other than some phasing, he hadn't even had to resort to his other Mangekyo Sharingan abilities again since he last used Amaterasu. There were quite a few injured and perhaps dead bodies laying around the large training area turned battlefield. Why many of them were interested in getting into a fight of this magnitude he didn't understand. They weren't in Konoha proper, so it wasn't like it affected them directly right now. Of course it was a bit of a blow to his pride every time he saw one of the clans that were previously from Water Country attempt to engage him, though none of them lasted more than a few minutes at best. The ones that gave him the most trouble were the Kaguya. It was truly sad that they moved to Konoha. Now he'd have to wipe them out completely when he was done here. Other than a small handful of their clan, the Sandaime Hokage was still standing, though he had no idea where the brat's teammates were. Well, perhaps Hiruzen wasn't so much of a brat anymore, considering the man looked older than he currently did. He was only a little roughed up and didn't really look to be in bad condition, unlike most of his other forces. Even his own students, the Densetsu no Sanin, had taken a beating. Well, more like the idiot with the white hair did. Their medic was currently attending to him while the pale one was giving him a calculating stare. No matter. Is this the best you and your village have to offer, Hiruzen? He mocked. We're stronger than you know, Madara. I have it on good authority that we're about to get stronger still. Spouting nonsense again. Will this be another of your wall of fire speeches? If so, spare me. Hiruzen said nothing, but instead crossed his arms over his chest and smirked slightly. Madara narrowed his eyes as he looked at the man. What was he getting so cocky about? His answer arrived a scant few seconds later, in the form of 2 golden flashes. He immediately recognized Nagato, and the girl standing to one side of him was the same one who had fled with Naruto before. Speaking of, you just couldn't stay dead, could you, Naruto? The blonde, who had a strange golden aura surrounding him, simply smirked. Missed me, did you? Madara grunted, hoisting his fan up so that part of the staff rested on his shoulder. Not really. Though if I had to be honest, a small part of me was regretting killing you off so early. I'm sure you'd be a better fight than everyone else here. Where is my wife, Madara? The old Uchiha made a show of looking around before shrugging. Oh. Somewhere out there among the rest of the trash, I'd guess. The same for your newest Hokage. The 2 glowing people in front of him looked to be barely able to contain their anger until the third person rested a hand on each of their shoulders, calming them somewhat. Ah, Nagato. I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. You didn't leave me much of a choice, when I found out what kind of peace you were really talking about. Madara rolled his eyes. Yes, let me guess, here comes another lecture. It's the same one I've been getting from everyone, about how it isn't peace if no one has free will. To me it certainly seems like all their free will is good for is killing each other. I thought you wanted that stopped. Nearly everyone I know does. But it will be pointless if we don't know who we are anymore. Whatever. Does this mean you're going to fight me too? Nagato's reply was only 2 words. He stuck out both of his hands in front of him, and in a commanding voice, stated, Bansho Tenin. Starting to feel the pull, Madara shifted his posture so that one leg moved forward slightly in a bracing stance, then lifted his free arm and showed his own palm to Nagato, finally opened his long-concealed right eye, and repeated the phrase. Several seconds of shocked silence followed. Madara took a quick glance around, noticing that only Naruto didn't seem surprised at this event. For some reason he found himself gritting his teeth in frustration. Did nothing surprise the brat. Putting it out of his mind for the moment, he focused in on Nagato once again. I gave you my own original eyes. I thought you'd enjoy the present, not try to use them against me. It really is no matter, though, since I know their every weakness anyway. I was afraid of this. Are the 2 of you ready? Yes, came Kurama's gruff reply in his mind. Surprisingly, when Naruto had been revived, they discovered that they could both speak clearly through their linked seals. Apparently all it took was forcing both of the current chakras into Naruto's seal, something they hadn't even thought about attempting to try. Remember, we've only managed to fill you up with enough of my chakra to last maybe 5 minutes at most. I can support Kushina indefinitely so long as she doesn't go around wasting shadow clones and menacing balls like you used to, but if I have to start feeding you chakra as well, I'm going to get drained fast. Understood. Kushina. Yes. If you find an opening, take him out. Otherwise we just need to find a way to pin him or keep him occupied so Nagato can work his magic. Got it. Nagato. The blonde saw the redhead turn to look at him out of his peripheral vision. What is it? If you find an opening, take it. I think our best chance would be for you to use the human path. You can use it as you are now, right? Yes. Nagato's response came out more like a question than a confirmation. Naruto understood why when he was asked another question. You've seen all of what I can do. Naruto shrugged, but still not looking away from Madara. Most of it, probably. But at least this time you aren't using 6 bodies by having chakra transmission rods sticking out of your back. There was a momentary pause before his new friend simply said, oh. One of many clones was quickly moving through both rubble and moaning bodies, looking for someone. Someone very important to him. The clone desperately wanted to stop and help many of the people that were obviously injured, some of which were mewling for anyone to help them. It would have made more copies of itself to try and help ease the pain in any way possible, were it not for strict orders. keeping an ear and eye out for trouble and making sure the fight wasn't coming back this way. Once the clone finally laid its eyes on the subject of its search, anything and everything else became unimportant. Mikoto was laying there, her back against a tree that had collapsed behind her. His wife's head was drooped down to her chest while her arms were splayed out from her sides, as if she had simply been a puppet whose strings were cut. Quickly making its way over, the first thing the clone did was lift her head slightly and touch her neck, feeling for a pulse. It wasn't long before one was found, allowing it a deep sigh of relief. All things considered, other than some tears to her Jonin uniform and some superficial cuts on her face and arms, she didn't really look all that worse for wear. Utilizing a diagnostic technique that he had learned forever ago courtesy of Sakura in Naruto's original timeline, the clone checked over his wife to see if she was badly injured. To the clone's pleasant surprise, however, it couldn't detect anything wrong with her other than a mild case of chakra depletion. In its limited capacity for self-thought, the clone wasn't really able to consider what Mikoto's current cause of unconsciousness was, but it had one more order left to follow. Since she wasn't awake, the task only became a little more complex, but it still could be done. The clone simply hoped that it had enough chakra left to complete its job. Gently cupping Mikoto's face in its hands, the clone pressed its lips to hers, starting an information transfer process through chakra that Naruto had discovered during the Fourth War, one which technically only needed basic skin-to-skin contact. However, no one else was around or coherent enough to pay attention to the current goings-on, and, well, she was Naruto's wife after all. After a few seconds, the clone began to fade and become almost transparent, before it disappeared with a small popping noise and no smoke, unlike it normally would. Among the sounds of rustling leaves and a fight still going on in the distance, Uchiha Mikoto gasped and woke. Madara grunted as he blocked a punch from the glowing girl, only to have to duck another swing from Naruto that likely would have taken his head off if he wasn't careful. His Rinnegan was active in both eyes now, which was both fortunate and unfortunate at the same time. On the negative side, it kept him from using all of his Sharingan techniques, unless he felt like parting with more chakra than was safe at this point. Worst of all was Susanoo, since it used too much chakra even with the Sharingan active, and even though his own reserves were incredible, they were not limitless. He might have been able to take on and make short work of everyone here with it, but he wasn't willing to chance it since he had no idea what kind of technique Naruto and the other girl were using right now. Oh, he knew that the girl was an Uzumaki and was the Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi, and his original thought was that he'd simply suppress it with his own Sharingan and his implanted DNA from Senju Hashirama. He only paused with his attempt because Naruto was able to do the same thing, and there was no possible way that both of them had the Kyuubi sealed inside them. The very thought was ludicrous. It made him wonder if they were in fact not using Kyuubi at all, but doing something he had never seen before. So using the Rinnegan was his best course of action right now, since it opened up a few more techniques that he could use, not to mention it would all but make him immune to his own eyes, which the traitor Nagato currently held. Such a disappointment, even if it was an oversight on his part. How was he supposed to know that the few scattered Uzumaki in the elemental nations actually kept in touch with each other? He'd never seen any evidence of it before, not even when he visited Nagato a few years ago. He was forced to bite back a curse as the Yondaime Hokage joined into the battle as well. Apparently he had sufficiently recovered from getting smacked around by the battle fan and was now currently flashing in and out of the fight, attacking any openings he could find when Naruto or the girl left one. Madara knew he couldn't keep going on like this forever, and he couldn't phase out either, since that was a Sharingan technique and currently locked away because of exorbitant chakra cost with his Rinnegan active. Finding an opening was proving nearly useless as well, with 3 speedy opponents constantly flashing around him. To hell with this, Shinra Tensei. The 3 of them were immediately thrown backwards, away from him. Taking the small reprieve to gain stock of his surroundings, he wasn't given much of an opportunity as he registered the same voice calling out the names of 2 different techniques. One wind, one fire. Quickly turning, he noticed as the Sandaime Hokage used a combination technique with a shadow clone to send a quickly moving column of fire at him. Smirking slightly, he simply held out his hand as the column of fire hit him. Hashirama's old student stared at Madara in shock as the technique simply evaporated around him. Thanks for the recharge. Here's a present of my own in return. Mokuton, Sashiki. The look of surprise quickly switched to a grimace as the Sandaime brought his adamantine staff to bear, smashing the blade-shaped pieces of wood that got close to him. Knowing that things could potentially get dicey if he had to handle any more than he was dealing with now, Madara brought his hands together for another technique while ducking an attack from Naruto, who had recovered more quickly than he expected. Mokuton, Jukai Heki. A series of thick and quick-growing branches began to sprout from the ground between him and the sandime, and continued spreading in a semicircle. They kept growing bigger and more interlocking until nothing was visible on the other side, and it effectively cut his current attackers off from more than half of the battlefield and any support. It wouldn't last long as he could already hear the sounds of snapping wood, but it shouldn't be beneath his abilities to handle these three upstarts before anyone broke through. Rasengan. Wah! His mouth snapped shut as he whirled around to face the latest attack, a giant ball of spinning chakra being held between the girl and the Yondaime, who were both running at him with surprising speed. As he prepared to absorb the massive chakra, however, it shrunk in size slightly as the Yondaime flashed over to him with a kunai in each hand. Shifting quickly, the Uchiha grunted as one of the kunai caught him in the thigh, even though he managed to block the other one with his fan. To his benefit, the Yondaime Hokage looked both surprised and pleased that he had managed to succeed, but his moment of victory was his own undoing as the handle of Madara's fan swung around and caught him in the gut. With an oof sound, the blonde went flying once again. His action must have further enraged the Jinchuriki, as she continued moving forward with the large Rasengan. Ignoring the pain of the kunai still stuck in his leg, he shifted to the side and absorbed what he could from the technique as it narrowly grazed him. The poor girl, however, overextended slightly with the attack. She attempted to recover, but Madara spun around with his good leg and kicked her in the back, sending her flying away with a scream. He watched dispassionately as she crashed into the ground nearby, her golden cloak flickering for a few moments as she struggled to climb back to her feet. That's when he finally noticed a loud screeching noise coming from behind him. Turning around quickly once again and preparing to defend against an attack from Naruto, he was instead mildly surprised to see the thorn in his side simply standing there. The other blonde was no longer glowing with the golden chakra cloak like before, and he idly wondered if his attack connecting with the Jinchuriki girl had anything to do with it. Madara did notice, however, that the young man in front of him appeared to have some sort of orange pigmentation around his eyes. Not only that, but he felt different. It was hard to describe other than the fact that he had a much harder time sensing the boy, even if he was completely visible. Madara's eyes narrowed. This was new. So was this attack, though it looked to be some variation of what the other two had done before. The Rasengan. Fool. You know I can absorb any chakra. Much to his displeasure, Naruto simply shrugged and smirked at him. Perhaps. But even Nagato learned he couldn't absorb this technique. With a shout of, Fuyuton, Raisin Shuriken, the blonde hurled the spinning mass of chakra at him. Madara stared at it in momentary shock, wondering how Naruto managed to keep such dense chakra from dispersing. Quickly regaining his bearings, he started to move his hand forward to absorb it. Then it expanded. Madara had seen a lot in his long life. While the Sharingan was a good tool for identifying and copying techniques even without needing to understand the intricacies of them, the Rinnegan was the ultimate at dissection, for lack of a better word. While he couldn't simply copy and reuse a technique like he could with the Sharingan, the Rinnegan would show him exactly what a technique did. He definitely did not like what he was seeing. Sadly, he didn't really have much time to inspect it as it was rapidly expanding further as it bore down on him. But with the exception of the menacing ball, he had never seen such pure destruction put into such a little package before. There was no way he'd be able to absorb it all in time. He prepared to absorb what he could as he brought his fan around to block it. Just in time too, as the outer edge of the technique started to press against it. If he learned one thing from this fight, it was that the Raisin Shuriken certainly took its time to do its thorough job. Madara was grunting with effort as he tried to keep his battle fan in front of him as it blocked the worst of the destruction. He used the Preta Path ability of his eyes to absorb what he could of the chakra that still assaulted him from the sides. He knew he wasn't able to get it all as random sharp stabbing pains began to affect him all over from the microscopic wind blades that he couldn't stop. After what felt like an eternity, the Uchiha breathed deeply as he tried to ignore the phantom pains all over his body. His chakra flow was still fine, so it was likely only superficial damage. Sadly, it looked like he would need a new battle fan, as this one was smoking in places and now had a few holes in it. Madara winced as he shifted his hands on the handle. They hurt a lot more than he wanted, but since he could still feel chakra flowing in them, all was well. There was a rustling noise behind him, and he tried to turn around yet again. Only this time a heavy weight settled on his leg. Looking down, he saw that the Yondaime Hokage had apparently flashed over to him again and was holding the leg so that he couldn't move it, while one hand was on the handle of the kunai that was still stuck there. Of course. Of all the... Madara's thought processes were interrupted as Naruto moved over and quickly grabbed an arm, holding onto it. Not sure what was going on now, Madara attempted to knock Naruto away with his fan, only for the Jinchuriki girl, who was glowing again, to grab that arm and hold it tight. He was effectively pinned, though he didn't really understand the point. Shaking his head and letting out a sigh, the Uchiha closed his eyes. Perhaps it was time for round, what was this, 3. Shinra T. The technique was stopped as something chilling and alien invaded his body from behind, gripping his body in a way that felt both familiar and terrifying. Looking down, he noticed a large chakra construct that was piercing him through the center of his chest. How does it feel, to have a blade in your chest, you monster? Looking over his shoulder, his eyes opened wide as he saw Uchiha Mikoto standing behind him with one of her eyes closed. She was leaning forward and was breathing heavily, with 2 glowing skeletal arms appearing from her sides. One was holding the blade that was going through him, while the other was holding a... No, it couldn't be. Madara was vaguely aware as his arms and leg were released. Gritting his teeth, he knew that this blade bound his body so that he couldn't move. However, it was his blade before, so he knew of a way to fight it, but it would take all of his concentration. Nagato, your turn. While he was already chilled from having the blade thrust through him, a feeling of dread in his stomach began to solidify as Nagato moved around from his other side. He was vaguely aware as others began approaching as well. Apparently they had either finally broken through the branches or the Raisin Shuriken had enough range to destroy them. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down he knew there was no way he'd be able to win this particular battle. His own arrogance had cost him, but he could learn from this experience. There were a few ideas as to how he could come back since he knew how to get around the blade eventually, but it would take time. He would have broken free now, but with Nagato here that plan wouldn't work since the redhead could keep Madara's soul with his body to make sure it was all sealed. He couldn't keep a small smirk off his face, now. Well, Naruto, it seems as you win this round. Naruto eyed Madara critically. This round? I have no idea what you're talking about. The old Uchiha shook his head. I used to own this blade. I have no idea how you acquired it, but if I'm going to be sealed then you should know I can get out of it. Time is all I need, and I have plenty of it. I'll be back. The ball of dread in Madara's gut only grew more pronounced as Naruto smiled at him. You technically died once, remember? It's how Nagato brought you back in a new body. I'm sure you recall how the blade ended up with you. Of course. It passed down to me when the previous head died. It was almost comical the way a light seemed to go off in Madara's head, as understanding immediately appeared in his unique eyes. I see. I seem to have overlooked quite a lot in my quest. Rest assured it won't happen again. You're right, it won't. Naruto's smile turned feral. You know how the sword of Totsuka works, as you said. It can seal anything it wants to. That means if it only wants to seal away your body, it will only seal away your body. Madara's eyes went wide again as the implications set in. It seems as though you understand. Nagato will be handling your soul. As if that line was the cue, Nagato's hands stretched forward and everyone watched as Madara appeared to lurch and blur for a moment. The man screamed for a few seconds before there was almost complete silence. With a swishing noise, Madara's physical body began to bend and shift in ways that weren't possible, before it collapsed in on itself into the sword, leaving only a transparent wraith-like figure behind. Mikoto pulled the sword out of the soul, sheathing it in the jar in Susanoo's other skeletal hand before nearly collapsing forward from exhaustion. Both Naruto and Kushina quickly moved forward to grab her arms, keeping the woman steady as they let her settle down to the ground. Meanwhile, Nagato stared blankly at the soul for a moment before moving it a little to his right, where to those who couldn't see the King of Hell, it simply disappeared. Looking around, he noticed both Hokages staring at him. It's done. He's gone. Both of them looked immensely relieved, then moved over to where Naruto and Kushina were crouched down next to Mikoto, speaking with her quietly. Minato crouched down in front of her, while the Sandaime stood close by. I'm so glad to see you're okay, both of you. Minato smiled at both his friend/alternate son and his old teammate, both of whom offered a tired smile in return. Looking at Naruto's body with a sword stuck in it was bad enough. Seeing you crash into that tree, I thought you were killed in front of me. Mikoto sighed and nodded. I saw Naruto killed in front of me, so I know what that feels like. As for me, I actually did die. Or I would have. But there is another technique I could use at the cost of one of my eyes called a Zanagi. Don't ask me how I learned about it because I couldn't tell you. It's almost like I just knew what it was and how to use it right as I was about to die. An uncomfortable silence settled on the group momentarily. Is that why? Kushina broke the quiet and looked curious about something, but her voice trailed off. When Mikoto noticed where her best friend's eyes seemed to linger but not directly stare, it wasn't hard to pick up on the unasked question. Yes, that's why my eye is closed. I can't open it at all. I lifted it with my finger before I got here to check, but I couldn't see anything. Total darkness. What about your other eye? I understand you were using quite a few techniques. Naruto inquired, frowning slightly as he recalled his knowledge of the Mangekyo. Mikoto looked up at her husband affectionately, bringing one hand towards his face to gently brush it across his cheek. You're a bit blurry, but I can still tell that you're the man I fell for. Naruto smiled at her, placing his hand lightly on top of hers. You know, we still have your father's eyes that he gave me. Do you want them? His wife actually looked surprised for a moment, as if she completely forgot about it before adopting a more pensive expression. I don't know. I'm not sure if I should. Can I think about it some, or would you not like it if I was like this? Naruto didn't even have to consider it for a second. I'm perfectly fine with whatever you choose. Honestly though, having an eye patch over one eye with a bright red Sharingan in the other. If that's not downright sexy and exotic, I don't know what is. Mild laughter came from the other three listening in as Mikoto's hand went around the back of Naruto's neck and she pulled him in for a kiss. As it continued, Minato and Kushina both looked away, while the Sandaime felt compelled to clear his throat to get their attention. As much as I hate to break this up, he said with a cheeky smile, causing the two to blush, I need to know for certain that Madara really is gone. We don't need him creeping back up when we least expect it. Both Mikoto and Naruto nodded at the same time, though it was Mikoto who spoke. You saw that I stabbed him with the sword of Totsuka. It essentially can bind anything at all forever, or until I or the next holder releases it. It's a legendary item among my clan that is passed down to the current head of the clan when the previous one dies. My father never got it, and neither did the head before him, so we thought it was lost. When Mikoto stopped talking and looked expectantly at her husband, he took it as the cue to continue. When one of my clones found Mikoto, it made sure she was okay, and if she was, its next job was to remind her of the sword. Upon talking with Nagato before heading into the fight, I was reminded of a brief conversation I had in my time about the sword with the person who had inherited it. Mikoto would have had it for nearly 2 years, but as she didn't have the Mangekyo yet, there was no way for her to check. The blonde graced his wife with a brief smile, which she returned, before he finished talking to the Sandaime. I'm glad she was able to use it, because if she wasn't, our job was still possible with Nagato's help. It would have involved wearing Madara down enough to the point where he wouldn't be able to protect himself from Nagato's soul capture technique, and I'm not sure how many we might have lost had it gone that way. Believe me, compared to the hell I came from, this was a much better alternative. When Naruto finished talking, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from Hiruzen's shoulders. The man sighed in relief before rubbing his forehead. So he really is gone, then. There was a chorus of affirmatives, and with a thankful smile and a nod, the Sandaime wandered off to tell the others the news. After the silence among them stretched out for a few comfortable moments, Minato chuckled, causing all attention to focus on him. So, since that's done and the third war is over, what do we do now? Now, Naruto grinned. I'm up for a festival. How about you guys? There was another chorus of agreements, before Minato and Kushina both excused themselves to go talk to the Sandaime about it right away. When they had wandered far enough away, he heard Mikoto murmur his name. Looking down at her, he paused for a moment upon seeing the slight frown on her face. What's wrong? I should be asking you that. Her hand rose once again, brushing across his cheek. She turned her fingers around to show him that they were wet. Why are you crying, Naruto? The fact that he had tears running down his face surprised him, but he confirmed it by wiping his other cheek and looking at his hand. I don't know. I guess I just feel so much relief that it's finally over, and I'm, well, free. I don't have a madman to deal with anymore. We're all free, thanks to your efforts. I'm glad we were all able to help even a little along the way. Nodding in acceptance but not saying anything further, he settled down on the ground next to his wife, grabbing her hand and holding it in his as she rested her head against his shoulder. I love you, Mikoto. I love you, too. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.